As a J-1 doctor subject to the 2-year home country rule, how do you avoid leaving the U.S. at the end of your training? Let's imagine a story about a physician named Dr. Kumar. He went to medical school in India and then came to the U.S. to complete his graduate medical education. It was basically his clinical training. To make his big move possible, Dr. Kumar was given a J-1 visa. This is a special type of visa that the U.S. gives to physicians for their clinical training. It's also used for others who are involved in cultural exchange. Now, Dr. Kumar is almost done with his training, but he really wants to stay in the U.S. He likes being a doctor here, and he thinks it's the best place for his career. His skills have grown a lot, and many employers are interested in hiring him when his training is done. But there's a problem with his J-1 visa. Like all doctors who are doing their training on a J-1, Dr. Kumar has to return to his home country, in this case India, at least 2 years after his training. This is known as the home residence requirement under the U.S. Immigration and Nationality Act, Section 212E. Dr. Kumar has worked very hard to get to this point in his career, and having to leave the U.S. for 2 years would hurt his plans. But there is something called a J-1 waiver. Dr. Kumar gets this waiver, he wouldn't have to leave the U.S. for 2 years, and this waiver would open a door for him to change his visa status in the U.S. There are other ways to fulfill the home country rule, or we'll address in future videos, but let's focus on J-1 waivers for now. There are 3 main types for physicians. First up, there is the most popular option, which is the Conrad waiver and other similar shortage area. The Conrad 30 waiver program lets each state, as well as District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and Guam, sponsor up to 30 J-1 physicians for waivers per fiscal year, which goes from October of one year to October of next year. The program was started by former U.S. Senator Kent Conrad and has been really helpful in reducing severe physician shortages in the U.S. medical system. Each state can request up to 30 waivers for doctors who agree to work full-time for 3 years in an underserved area. Basically, it's an area that needs more doctors. Up to 10 of the 30 waivers per state may be for flex waivers, where the doctor is not actually working in an underserved area, but serves people who live in underserved areas. For example, think about an academic medical center not physically located in an underserved area, but it can still apply for a flex waiver because its patients typically come from far and wide, including many who are from underserved areas. This is especially the case if the academic medical center is surrounded by rural communities. There are also a few federal agencies that can sponsor J-1 physicians who will work in underserved areas. These are the Delta Regional Authority, Regional Commission, Department of Health and Human Services with its clinical waiver, U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, the newish Southeast Crescent Regional Commission, and the newest Northern Border Regional Commission. These federal agencies can recommend limited waivers, unlike the state Conrad programs, but they do not have that flex slot option that the states have. The state or interested government agency will forward its waiver recommendation to Department of State, and then finally, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services will approve. I'll quickly add that there are other U.S. federal agencies that may be able to sponsor a waiver for a J-1 physician who might not be working in a shortage area or at a VA hospital for the VA program, such as U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which offers a research-based waiver program as well for those who are involved in medical research. This is, by the way, different from an HHS clinical waiver. There are also waivers that are based on humanitarian reasons. For the hardship waiver, the doctor must prove that his or her U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident spouse or child would face exceptional hardship if the doctor had to live in the home country for 2 years. According to the U.S. government, exceptional hardship must be more than normal hardship, as they would call it, expected from a temporary relocation or separation. We look at all of the family's circumstances, including medical, psychological, career, financial, and sociocultural hardship in the event where either there's a family separation or the whole family relocates to the home country. We also look at country conditions, travel warnings in the home country, etc. An application for this waiver is filed directly with USCIS following a determination of initial eligibility, moves to Department of State for a recommendation, and with that recommendation, ultimately back to USCIS for the final decision. Finally, for the persecution waiver, another humanitarian waiver, the doctor must prove that he or she would be subject to persecution because of his or her race, religion, or political opinion. As with a hardship waiver, an application for this waiver is also filed directly with USCIS following a determination of initial eligibility to Department of State for a recommendation. That recommendation ultimately back to USCIS for the final decision. Now, you might have heard of a no objection waiver where J-1's home country government tells Department of State that it has no objection to the J-1 not returning for 2 years. However, note that this waiver will not help a J-1 physician subject to the 2 years based on clinical training. Additionally, U.S. government funding can make many of these waivers a lot harder. Remember, each of these waivers has its own rules and steps. It is very important to talk with an experienced immigration attorney before applying. This explanation was helpful. If you are a J-1 physician or if you have questions about the different types of J-1 waivers, please feel free to comment below. There are often options, and I'm happy to help you. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.